So for us, it actually starts right here on the Innovation Index. And as Jay already spoke about, we're sitting at number 18 on the Bloomberg Index, well below South Korea, Singapore, Switzerland, and Sweden, with poor rankings in manufacturing value add, technical high density, tertiary efficiency. And these are just to name a few. And we really, as a nation, have to start getting serious about these scores, because ultimately they affect our livelihoods and they affect our quality of life here in Australia. For us, it's all about leadership, and I think Jaya basically identified that. And for us, it's about being able to get leaders to be future fit. And the first thing is about making sure that technology is on all of their radar, as technology really is driving this pace of change. We also know that some of the big technology companies, including Alphabet and Amazon, are now ranking number 1 and 2 on the R&D spending in 2017. This will be the first time that they're actually sitting in those positions above technology companies such as Samsung Electronics and vehicle companies like Volkswagen. What will they do with that innovation spend? We also know this war for talent is actually getting really serious. And what I mean by that is I've got a quote here from the World Economic Forum, and it says, "Talent will be more important than capital in the very near future." Now, for the economics and the commercial CFOs amongst us, that is a very scary proposition, because we can't just cost cut out of it. We can't buy our way out of it. We need to be focusing on this. And finally, for us, education disruption is a really important one. And that's why I asked Mel to come and talk to us directly, because the universities play such an important part in developing our future leaders and making sure that they're future fit.
All right, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening in the education sector. And I wonder if anyone in the last year went to an academic conference. This is very encouraging, and when I ask my academic colleagues when did they last go to an industry conference, it's almost no hands up in the room. So, and yet we're trying to create collaboration, and what's funny to me is that we're doing industry engagement conversations at our university without industry at the table. And the challenge for universities is to produce these ambidextrous individuals who are able at one point to be comfortable being led by leaders who encourage exploration, that Jay was talking about before, but also comfortable being a little bit more controlled and focused. So that means we're looking for ambidextrous graduates to come out and work in your organisation. So thanks so much for the challenge. And meanwhile, we've had a 2.2 billion cut to our funding in Australia. That said, that's actually been diverted and moved around, and so I wouldn't like to say it's actually bad. It's actually, for me, making universities be a bit leaner. So I'm a fan of cutting. I think that let's cut education, and I'm not speaking on behalf of my university, I might say. My Vice-Chancellor would not want me saying that, but I'm saying that actually what it can do when you cut is make you think completely differently about how you're going to survive. At the same time, money is flowing towards impact. Now, previously, which you may not have known, when the government, who are the main funders of research, would fund a piece of research, they were looking for academic impact. So that meant that if you had 5 journals, 5 papers published in Nature magazine, that was great, you were having fantastic impact. However, that didn't necessarily mean that we are now growing broccoli differently. So we're now starting to measure that, and universities, I predict, in the next few years are going to start to be ranked on impact, and that impact is not just we've raised awareness about diabetes, but we're actually seeing a decrease in obesity and a decrease in diabetes. That's true impact. The third thing that's happening, and this is around the world, is interruption. So I kind of use that word instead of disruption. I think that what universities are here for is to teach and learn, but one of the things that we're really about is we want to interrupt the trajectory of disease. Western Sydney is a big hotspot for diabetes, for example, and we've got some of the world leading researchers in that space, but we want to interrupt the trajectory of disease. So those are the 3 things. We're getting our money cut, money is flowing towards impact, and we are being interrupted ourselves, and we want to interrupt. Now, how do universities work with you as a leader to become this ambidextrous individual? Well, we work with individuals from the age of 5 to 95. So you might think, well, you go there when you're 20, but why have those people got the complete domination of learning in the university context. Well, they don't. We work with 5-year-olds, we work with 95-year-olds. So we have living labs that cater for that. Those living labs involve every member of community who can come in and shape things, and I'll give a couple of examples of that. The student programs, we're starting to introduce risk a lot more heavily, and I'll give an example of what Indonesia's doing there. And with academics, we're sending them to things like the SARO on innovation program, and industry a lot more closely. We're finding that it's fluid, the boundaries between a university and industry. So we're getting some of our graduates, they'll go get a job, we meet with the boss of that graduate and say, hey, leave them here in the uni using all this state-of-the-art equipment, and we will half pay their salary as well. So that's what the joint appointments lead to. So here are just 4 little stories. So if we start in your top left, the Netherlands. Now, the University of Twente, if anybody knows, it is, it's quite an old university, but in 1917, around that time, they were almost going bust. They were in all sorts of dire trouble financially. So they took this decision to be ruthless about their programs. They cut programs, and they decided that all the knowledge they generate must flow to society. That was not happening previously, and that's when they made that decision. They're now one of the benchmark universities in the world for innovation. In Indonesia, there's an agricultural university, Bogor I think it's called, Bogor Agricultural University. They wanted to introduce leadership and risk-taking to their academics and students, and what they found was that nobody was interested in these programs. So they didn't understand why until they realised that most of their students couldn't afford their own student fees. So what did they do? They'd go and start a company, and that company would pay their student fees. So that was keeping them super busy outside of normal learning hours. And so actually they said, well, keep doing that, but we're going to support you so that when you graduate, you can keep that company growing and you'll have made good decisions and learned leadership skills to run your company. And also academics were doing it. They were on the side running these companies. So in the UK, so I was at the Sussex Innovation Centre, which is attached to the University of Sussex. So a couple of things we did there were working with American Express. Now, if anyone's sick of hearing about AI, machine learning, right, data, I'm hit a nerve there. American Express was having this challenge. They had so much data, and they didn't know what to do with that. So we created these degrees where we co-supervised with them. So they'd get problems sent in from all around the world, from New York, Sydney, whatever. They'd be given to 4 students, so it was cheap labour in a way, right? But those students got applied research. They could actually take that data, do something with it, and discover something and create a solution, which was owned by the company. And that's now been running about 11 years, and with some fantastic results. In fact, about 30% of those students started companies because they now knew what fintech needed. Now, in Australia, my example is Western Sydney University. It's a total shock. And what we're doing is with citizens. So I wanted to pick that up. We, out at the Blue Mountains, the Gross River, there's a 30-kilometre section where 80% of the platypus population in Australia live. Now, imagine if that river was poisoned to the point where that was unsustainable living environment for the platypus. Well, that's what happened. So we had this massively dropping population of platypus. So we engaged through one of our researchers, Dr. Ian Wright, to go out and he used to work at Sydney Water, which is quite interesting. So he knew a lot about water. Out he goes and he started to engage citizens. They were taking measurements in this 30-kilometre stretch. That led to a talk that he gave in a sort of a town hall setting where the Environment Minister at the time heard the talk, and the long story short changed the policy, which meant that 7 years later we've got back to sustainable levels. So those 4 country examples, and there are so many more, UK was co-creating the future with Amex and make sure that whatever your graduate does, that it's going to be relevant to when they arrive in this VUCA crazy world that you're going to talk about. And that in the Netherlands, that it was focus on impact, knowledge flowing to society, and be patient. So I think we do tend to have a 1-2 year business plan. Indonesia was having this top-down drive, but bottom-up welcome, really listening to the front line and responding to that. And in Australia, this example of where we're integrating citizens more and having these living labs and getting everyone mobilised around why you're doing a thing first.
We wanted to be able to have a look at how we might be able to get leaders to impact certain areas, and we sort of classified 4 people-related areas. The first was reimagination, and a lot of this had to do with how might we actually use tech today and reimagine solutions of the future. We wanted to be able to look at some of the future skills that leaders needed to build in themselves and their people, to look at how important engagement and co-creation is, and we've heard a lot about that already this morning, and finally about purpose. But let's have a look at a couple of examples. In my life-saving example, it's not about getting faster and smarter and younger lifesavers, although that's always a good thing. It is about thinking how might we reimagine this process, and perhaps drone technology could be a part of that. We know that there's already trials going on with the Little Ripper. That's actually creating a faster and safer experience. We know that farming is under tremendous pressure. How might we reinvent farming or reimagine farming? Well, vertical farming is one of those ways. It actually uses 95% less water, no pesticides, and is producing over 100% more per metre squared and faster to market. Bowery in New York City is actually trialling this with high data analytics and actually proving to be very successful. What about our housing shortage? Is 3D printing an option? Well, yes. A Russian company has now been able to print a house within less than 24 hours for $10,000. And so it is possible. But would you ever have thought that that was possible with 3D printing? So I think we've got to continue to reimagine. And if we look at solar, how might we reimagine solar? Well, the Chinese have done it and then created the first solar highway, which is generating electricity for both the street lights and snow melting equipment. So I think it's really important, this reimagination component. But the skills of 2020, as defined by the World Economic Forum, are complex problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. And if there's one takeout of today, is to make sure that all of you in this room are thinking about how you can actually invest in yourselves and be talking to your people about how you are actually creating the learning plans for them. From an engagement perspective, Gallup talks about 67% of us not being engaged with our company mission or philosophy, a pretty scary thought, and one that we need to get serious about. And it doesn't take a huge amount, but it does mean that it requires authentic leadership that actually allows their people amazing working environments, provides them a voice, gives them the tools to be able to do the job, and devolves some of the leadership. And I know for many leaders this might be quite a confronting notion, but we know that leadership today has to be brave. It has to be able to create a safe environment where people can actually ask why and challenge the logic of your decisions. And if you allow this, engagement goes through the roof, as does trust. It also allows leaders to actually modify their strategy and improve their decision making. And in the future, the complex problem solving that Mel's been talking about requires a rethink and a co-creation of all of us getting together to recreate purpose and strategy or products and services. This is not something that our leader in executive group can do in a boardroom in an hour or 2 days by themselves. They need to have people on the front face. They need to be looking at academic organizations. They need to be bringing partners together. And finally, for me, purpose is all about humanizing the organizations of the future. And this is not some motherhood notion that I have. This has actually been proven to have a direct return on bottom line. If we aren't able to have organisations with authentic purpose, we will not be able to attract and retain talent of the future. But let's just focus on the things that really, really matter. The first thing is to acknowledge that we're living in a VUCA world. And what do I mean about this is demystify this with your teams. Talk to them about what this actually means for you and them and their families and education. I think the first thing is acknowledge these changes and look to the future about where the training might come from and get involved, start somewhere. For me, it's all about that purposeful vision, starting at the front and actually being able to communicate and bring your people along. In my perfect world, it would be a co-created purpose and vision that would actually be involving all of your employees. Form partnerships and alliances outside of sector because you might be really surprised at what that actually delivers. Reimagine new combinations because it's amazing what is possible when you experiment. and start your path of lifelong learning, because if we're the leaders in this room, we need to continue to stay relevant. We've heard a lot of information already today, and it's really important for us to stay on that path. And finally, own the future, lead by example, be proactive. The world of innovation is really, really tough, and it requires leaders to step up. Thank you so much for listening. I hope we've been able to inspire you. We'd really like to open it up for questions.